All right, it's almost 10 minutes past 2. I'm going to make a start and hope that the others join us as soon as they can. Are there any issues relating to the issue brief, or is that coming on? Everybody has identified a topic and is busy preparing the assignment. No response?
I have a question. So I got local topic, right? So I wondered if my title should just be the local topic. Because I plan to like use examples internationally about nationally and internationally about the same topic. So I wondered if I should make it kind of general or specific to the specific.
All right.
Like
Where is the problem you're writing about? Where is it? Because the problem must be existing somewhere.
Yes, the right information.
Right. So the topic should be around that, but you can add information to supplement or to describe the problem. All right?
So the main title just stick to the issue Jamaica.
Right.
And then in the discussion, just make the example.
Okay. All right. Okay, so today we want to discuss climate change with particular emphasis on health effects. Climate change is a very topical issue, but I'm not certain that the ordinary man in the street understands the phenomenon of climate change, because in a sense it's kind of abstract. It's not something you can touch, you can feel, you can hear, and so on. But it's upon us. It's described as the existential problem of our time. And certainly, if we not do things to adapt or to mitigate the effects, then clearly man is going to be in for a very, very torrid time. So as usual, I have a number of objectives here relating to defining some of the terms related to climate change, to explain the greenhouse effect and its relationship to climate change, to discuss the IPCC's latest summary of climate change projections for policymakers. We want to look at the causes and effects of climate change on health and the environment. We want to differentiate between mitigation and adaptation methods for climate change, with emphasis on the healthcare system. And also we want to look at the projected impacts of climate change on different regions of the world, but with emphasis on small island states like we have here in the Caribbean. And we want to talk about about climate sensitive diseases and the health implications. And finally, we want to look at the Paris Agreement and its role in addressing the climate crisis. So to start our discussion, I want to indicate that there are many large-scale and global environmental hazards to human health that are occurring simultaneously. So we're going to talk about climate change today, but we must also bear in mind other global environmental changes, including stratospheric ozone depletion. We have had a situation where the ozone in the stratosphere, which is regarded as good zone, as good ozone, has been there, and its main purpose is to protect us from ultraviolet radiation. But we have man-made chemicals, CFCs or chlorofluorocarbons, which somehow get into the stratosphere and destroyed a considerable portion of this ozone, creating a big hole, so big enough that North America could hold in that hole. So it's a big hole we're talking about. So way back from in the 90s, we embarked on phasing out of ozone depleting substances. Here in Jamaica, it was a kind of a success story. Globally, much of the CFCs have been phased out, and suitable alternatives have been put in place. But the ozone hole is recovering, but it is very far from being the intact ozone structure that existed before. So as I speak, you still have a hole in the ozone layer, but if anything, it has stabilized and is not getting any bigger. So that's a very important change that is happening as we speak. We have also witnessed changes in ecosystems due to loss of biodiversity. Certainly here in Jamaica, we have lost important species of animals, particularly birds and vegetation. The world has experienced changes in the hydrological systems and the supplies of fresh water, so much so that there are regions where there's water scarcity, and there are other regions where there is water stress. Water is a big issue here in Jamaica, and I wish the authorities would do much more in providing water for the population, providing potable water for the population, so that we can witness a decrease in infectious diseases, an increase in personal hygiene, and all of that. Land degradation is taking place. What with deforestation, what with the disposal of hazardous waste on land. And the hazardous waste include hazardous chemicals and also radioactive materials. So sections of the world, land degradation is real. There is desertification taking place, and this has implications for agriculture and for food security. The phenomenon of urbanization continues. Every large city or town in the world has witnessed some kind of urbanization, and very often this urbanization is not planned. So because of urbanization, we have seen an increase in a number of environmental health problems, including sanitation and waste management, water supplies, and we are all too familiar with squatter settlements and unplanned communities across Jamaica and the Caribbean. So urbanization is also happening as we speak, and while it is good if it is planned properly. If it is not, then environmental health problems can result. And then we have various stresses on food producing systems. We are producing a lot of food, but later you will learn that according to the FAO, about 1/3 of all the food that is that is supposed to be produced, roughly 1/3 goes to waste every year. It's either lost or wasted. So while that is happening, we have roughly 1 billion people who go hungry every day, because the problem is not so much the lack of food, but who owns the food and how is it distributed? That's the key issue. So along with climate change, there are many other changes occurring, and I want us to be aware of these changes as well. So in terms of the changes that I just spoke about, what we're experiencing is an escalation of human pressure on the global environment. And all these changes I just mentioned are taking place. And in terms of health, 3 things happen. We have direct health effects resulting from all these changes, what with floods and heat waves and water shortage and landslides and all of those things. These are direct health impacts that result from these environmental changes. And then we have ecosystem-mediated health impacts. So because of what these changes do to the environment, we have all kind of infectious disease risk taking place. We have reduced food yields, which may lead to malnutrition and stunting. We have depletion of natural medicines. We have problems related to mental health, whether it be at the personal level or at the community level. And then we have impacts of aesthetic and what they call cultural impoverishment. So because the ecosystem is altered, that too can lead to certain health impacts. And thirdly, we may have indirect, deferred, and displaced health impacts. So problems related to livelihood loss, population displacement, including slum dwellings. We have conflicts. There's no shortage of conflicts in the world as we speak. Look at what is happening in Gaza. Look at what is happening in Ukraine. Look at what is happening in parts of Africa. And so the response to some of these effects has been really inappropriate adaptation and mitigation. Some countries are just not equipped to adapt properly to these changes or to prevent them from happening in the first place. So this was the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment, which was done in 2005. If anything, the situation could have gotten worse by now. But one thing is certain, because of all these environmental changes, things are happening. Human health is being impacted in one way or another. Just to remind you about some key facts on climate change. as put forward by the World Health Organization. So currently and for some time, climate change is directly contributing to humanitarian emergencies, from heat waves in Europe and elsewhere, to wildfires in the United States and elsewhere, floods, tropical storms, hurricanes. They're all increasing in scale, in frequency, and intensity. We are told that 3.6 billion people will live in areas highly susceptible to climate change, and that between 2030 and 2050, climate change is expected to cause 250,000 deaths, additional deaths per year, from undernutrition, malaria, diarrhea, and heat stress alone, right? Also, the direct damage costs to health will soar to between 2.4 billion US, 2 to 4 billion US dollars per year by 2030, which is a mere 5 years from now. So climate change is real, even though some try to argue quite stupidly that there is no such thing as climate change. But like the wheat and the tares, we have those who are sensible and those who are stupid. But if you're not careful, you may get the impression that stupidity is winning, right? And much evidence is available if you look north, but I don't expect what is happening up north to be with us forever and ever. Amen. I think we're just going through a phase, and like a storm, it will blow off. Another key point to note about climate change is that areas with weak health infrastructure, and here we're talking about developing countries, will be least able to cope without assistance to prepare and to respond. Countries in the Caribbean, including Jamaica, have always depended on assistance from richer countries, but we must take note of the fact that the richest country on earth is cutting back on assistance in a very indiscriminate manner. And certainly many countries are going to feel the effects. If you look at agencies like USAID that provided so much assistance for countries across the globe, it is non-existent now. And so many countries are trying to survive with their usual assistance, but I think it's just for a time. It therefore means that reducing emissions of greenhouse gas should be our #1 priority. And this can be done through better transport. Electric vehicles are being promoted, but let us not fool ourselves. Those who own oil and have been storing oil for decades are not going to lay down and die. Right? They're going to find a way to make oil the center of the universe. And so we're going to have a problem. Food and energy choices, very important. And we also need to reduce air pollution. And we'll talk about air pollution in a separate session. So many people have developed not only physical effects due to climate change, but also the mental health of many people have also been affected. So we have a number of climate-related illnesses, premature death, malnutrition in all its forms, hot extremes, including heat waves, have intensified in cities. And we now have increased observed heat-related mortality. The range expansion of vector-borne diseases into previously colder areas is happening. So there are areas, for example, in North America, where you don't have transmission of certain vector-borne diseases like malaria and even dengue. But given the fact that climate is changing, it's getting hotter, it will now become more favorable for mosquitoes to survive in those warmer areas now because of climate change. And so spread diseases like malaria. Food insecurity is a big issue. It was reported recently that an international study found that food insecurity in Jamaica was at about 55%. And that is alarming when we speak of very low unemployment and when we speak of decreasing the levels of poverty. And if the levels of poverty have been decreased and we have lower unemployment, and something is wrong if more than half the population, their food is not guaranteed. They have problems finding food to eat. So something is not wrong somewhere, right? Because if we're going to have food insecurity, we're going to experience malnutrition, including undernutrition, overweight, and obesity. And clearly we know that obesity and overweight are risk factors for other non-communicable diseases. So climate change is doing all kinds of things. So there's no doubt that the earth is warming. Our temperature has risen by 1.5 degrees Fahrenheit over the past century. And the projection is for it to rise another 0.5 to 8.6 degrees Fahrenheit over the next 100 years. What we also need to be aware of is that small changes in the average temperature of the planet can translate to large and potentially dangerous shifts in climate and weather. So we are looking at what is expected of the global climate changes. So one source is saying 1.4 degrees to 8 degrees Celsius by 2100. And of course, rising global mean in sea levels of 9 to 88 centimeters. So while the Earth is heating up, the ice caps are melting. And all of this water is going into the sea and the ocean. So you're going to have sea level rising. And that is not a good look, because species that now live in those cold regions are going to be threatened with extinction. All right? So even though what we are talking about is happening slowly, we have accumulated enough evidence to be convinced that this thing is real. It's really happening. So again, this is a kind of schematic framework where we have, let's see if I can get this. Where is this thing? All right, so we have two systems, Earth systems and human systems interacting. So to the left, we have the climate process drivers. So we have the greenhouse gases, and they result in climate change, which is evidenced by elevated temperatures, sea level rise, changes in precipitation or rainfall, and more extreme events like flooding and hurricanes and those things. And then we have the human systems, governance, literacy, health, population, all of those things. And they also are affected. So we have impacts on ecosystem through the climate changes, impacts on food security and water resources and human health. And we are left with two major options. One is to adapt as best as we can, and the other is mitigation. When we talk about mitigation in relation to climate change, we are referring to efforts to reduce the amount of carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, right? So we will discuss, especially in relation to the health system, adaptation and mitigation measures for climate change. In stock. Okay. All right. If we look at the seas, the ocean, we can readily identify this triple threat where the oceans are getting warmer, the oxygen in the ocean is getting less, and the water is becoming more acidic. This has serious implications for marine life and the amount of fish we can get in the future. So sea level rise is accelerating flooding of coastal communities, and drowning of wetlands and habitats. You have warm water coral reefs could be lost. Toxic algae are making fish, birds, and marine animals and people sick. Habitats, lower oxygen levels are suffocating some marine animals and destroying them. The acidification of the ocean, so more acid water is going to harm animals that build shells such as corals and clams and oysters. So in short, we could see decreases in the quantum we get when we fish, and certain disruptions in fisheries will affect not only the marine food web, but local livelihood. The farmers will be affected, not farmers, sorry. Fishermen will be affected and their families, and this will contribute to global food insecurity. So it's all happening. So we should be able to make a distinction between climate change and weather. Briefly, weather can change from hour to hour, from day to day, from season to season, whereas climate is the average weather for a particular region over a long period, many decades, right? And so it is much more difficult for people to conceptualize climate change, while at the same time easier for them to conceptualize weather because the changes are more frequent. But if you look back 20, 30 years, for those who can look back that long, we would have noticed here in Jamaica, there was a time when we had two distinct rainy seasons in Jamaica. We used to get a lot of rain in May, and we used to get a lot of rain in October. May is now as hot and as dry as any other month. And so too is October, right? And nowadays, we don't get rain as frequently, but when we do have it, it tends to be more intense, right? So climate is what you expect, but weather is what you get. So you get the nightly weather report and forecast on the radio or television. You don't get any climate forecast, so to speak. We have to depend on the scientists to let us know what is happening. The term global warming is not so widely used anymore. Global warming refers to the rise in global temperatures, but it doesn't capture all that is happening. And so the preferred term now is climate change, which include rising global temperatures and other things. So there are different definitions of climate change. This one is put out by the IPCC. And the IPCC is the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. And every now and again, they put out a report. So if you're interested to learn more about climate change, you can log on to the IPCC website, where they have some very current information. This definition is put forward by the United Nations Framework Convention on climate change. But any definition of climate change must include the fact that whatever changes are taking place over a period of time, which may be decades or longer. All right? So you can develop your own definition. Now, the scientific community is not in total agreement that climate change is taking place. So if you look at the slide is showing you academic studies of scientific consensus on human-caused global warming or climate change. And the author Cook in 2016 reported 97% consensus among scientists. Powell in 2019 reported 100%. Linus 2021 reported greater than 99%. Myers again reported 98.7%. The fact is that the great majority of scientists concur that human-caused global warming or climate change is taking place. And what should concern all of us is that the country with some of the most prominent scientists that agree with this fact are led by someone who doesn't know anything about science, yet disagrees to the extent that the United States was withdrawn from the Paris Accord back in 2019, which was really a disgrace. And then Biden returned to the Paris Agreement. And now the US is again threatening to withdraw. There can be no Paris Accord. There can be no effort to deal with climate change if it does not include the United States. The United States is the second largest producer of greenhouse gases behind China, which is the number one. So if the number two producer of global greenhouse gases is not at the table, there are going to be problems. So how concerned are people worldwide about climate change? A study was done. I don't know if it included Jamaica, I doubt it, but a study was done and it reports that worldwide people are much less concerned about climate change. Developing countries in particular rank it low, developing countries like the Caribbean. And this illustration is showing the percentage of times each issue appeared in the top 3 worries for respondents. So people interviewed were much more concerned about unemployment and jobs, and rightly so. They were more concerned about poverty and social inequality, 34%. They were more concerned about corruption at 33%, crime and violence at 28%, healthcare at 22%, education at 18%, immigration control at 17%, taxes at 13 and climate change at just 7%. The fact is that there are many issues that are more important to the survival of people than climate change. They need a job, right? We need to get out of poverty. We need to do something about corruption and crime and violence and healthcare and education. So I'm not surprised that climate change is ranked low. What we need to do is that we need to address the bigger issues according to the people, but we also need to find a way to educate and create more awareness about climate change. And it doesn't have to be an expensive venture. We have enough media to assist. I don't know why we're not getting more information, right?
Sir, question.
Yeah.
Is it that, I don't know, was there ever anything done to kind of show persons that climate change has, I want to say, like a direct bearing or indirect bearing? I want to say direct bearing on all of those larger issues that it is that they consider to be more pressing to them in terms of climate change.
I don't know, but I don't think so, because this is just a survey, find out what were the main issues to people. You understand me? If anything, depending on how many people have been surveyed, if anything, somebody could have gone back to some of these people and indicate to the countries that participated that, hey, these are the issues, and to indicate exactly what you said about all the issues being related to climate change. I know here in Jamaica, we had a climate change branch within one of the ministries, but I have not been hearing much about it. Here on campus, I think the university has a climate change committee or something like that. But the thing is that much of the work being done on climate change is being done by scientists and people in academia. And very often the man in the street, the man in the community is not educated about these issues, because clearly everybody has a carbon footprint. So everybody needs to know what they can do to reduce their own footprint. All right, so farmers need to know about climate change, right? Cattle, for example, they produce a lot of methane, right? So agriculture contributes a lot to greenhouse gas in terms of methane production, all right? When we indiscriminately dispose of the waste, when we dump it and it decays, of course it produces carbon dioxide, all right? Or at the dump site, it produces methane. Carbon dioxide and methane are the two most important greenhouse gases, all right? So you raise an important issue, but as I've always said, many times in countries like ours, when we speak about education, we think it is only the ordinary man that needs to be educated. Sometimes it is more important that the policymakers be educated. And many of them, if you were to ask them what is climate change, you'll be embarrassed by the answer you get. All right? So there's greater need for education, but it must include policymakers and government officials, because they have to develop the policy to drive the efforts to deal with climate change. And if they are oblivious as to what this thing is, I don't know. Well, I would love to hear somebody just pick one or two of our MPs and just interview them on certain basic issues and hear their response. You'll be surprised at some of the responses you get. All right, so this is a climate change IPCC synthesis report on climate change 2023, and it provides a summary for policymakers. All right. I don't know how many of them have seen this report, but there are important things there for them to read and to act upon. All right. So certainly need to know about greenhouse gases. You need to know that the emission of these gases is increasing and that this is affecting the weather and climate, right? And that vulnerable communities are more at risk to suffer as a result of climate change. And so one of the effects of climate change is that it has reduced food security and affected water security. And this has affected efforts to meet the SDG goals, the Sustainable Development Goals. They need to know about the morbidity and the mortality that climate change has caused. They need to know about the fact that vector-borne diseases, the incidence have increased, right? And they need to know about key barriers to adaptation, which will be limited resources, lack of citizen engagement, which we've been talking about, insufficient mobilization of finance, low climate literacy, right? So people don't know enough about climate, lack of political commitment, limited research, and this low sense of urgency. In terms of current mitigation progress, well, some progress is happening, but there are several gaps and challenges, right? And the report continues, right? So I don't know how many of our policymakers have seen this document, but it is there if they want to see it, all right? So again, what we have been experiencing, if you look at the situation since the 1850s onwards, we can see annual hottest day temperature change. So of course, it's getting hotter. We can't dispute that, right? We have also seen the annual mean total column soil moisture change, the annual wettest day precipitation change. All that is happening. The scientists are providing the information, right? Again, you can see from the 1850s up to 2000 that the ocean, land and ocean temperature has been increasing. Likewise, average sea level, the rise has also been increasing. So we have irrefutable evidence that climate change is taking place. And it's not that you can just ignore it. If you ignore it, you ignore it at your own peril. So all these just information to reinforce the fact that It is happening, increasing global carbon dioxide emissions, global average greenhouse gas concentrations, all of that has been going up. So methane, nitrous oxide, carbon dioxide, all those concentrations have been going up. All right. Good. So what is going to happen to him or her? Extinction.
We're all gonna die.
Eh? Well, put it this way,
We're not gonna die.
adaptation
Yeah. We're not gonna
is
die.
not easy. It's not easy to adapt. You know, certainly a lot of these polar bears have died and more are going to die as the glaciers and the ice caps melt. All right. So extinction is a possibility. We might find some innovative ways to create their natural habitat elsewhere. You know, I went to Las Vegas, which is one of the hottest places in the United States, right? And when I decided to leave the hotel and step outside, I had to run back inside because the place was as hot as whatever. Yet in Las Vegas, they have a bar called the Ice Bar. Everything in that bar is made of ice. The seats are made of ice. The glass of drink water is made of ice. So it's inside that bar is sub-zero temperature. So if you want to go inside, you have to rent a coat. You can't go in there just like that. You're not allowed to stay in there for more than, I think it's 15 minutes or 20 minutes. And since this is probably my only opportunity to go in such a place, I went inside there, and for days, even though I had on gloves, for days my fingers did not feel normal.
But question, Dr. Scarlett.
Yeah?
What about the bartenders? If persons of patrons are only allowed 15 minutes, what about the bartenders?
They were dressed in a better way than we were dressed. Some thick. I didn't have, it wasn't like bartenders, it was more like a bartender. It's a small place, you know, so you didn't have a lot of staff inside there. So maybe not more than probably 10 people could hold inside there at any one time. So they rotate them, but inside there was, it's pretty cool. So they said they tear down the building and rebuild it 2 times a year. So to me, it was like a contrast. In one of the hottest places, I find one of the coolest bars. Yeah. Anyway, so this man or woman is in trouble. All right, so of course we have had a lot of observations in relation to climate change. So we know here in Jamaica definitely that it's getting hotter, right? Don't you all feel hotter? Eh?
Yes.
Yes, you do. So what is happening is that there has been a change, right? So if you look at this diagram, the y-axis speaks to the probability of occurrence, and the x-axis speaks to the kind of weather you may have: cold, average, hot. And what I want to show you, if you look at the first curve here, the mean or the average temperature would be here, right? But because things are getting hotter, we now have a new mean, which is about here, right? So we are experiencing more hot weather and more record hot weather, right? So that is why we are having many more people dying from heat waves in Europe, right? And heat waves kill, most of the people who die from heat waves will be older people with cardiovascular problems, right? So what are the causes of climate change? Climate change results from both natural and anthropogenic or man-made drivers, including greenhouse gas emissions and the atmospheric concentrations of these greenhouse gases, to a lesser extent what they call radiative forcing and climate responses and effects. So the whole climate system is dominated by long-lived greenhouse gases, and the emissions of these gases due to human activities have grown since pre-industrial times. All right? So the Industrial Revolution, which has brought much progress to mankind, literally signaled or started the climate change experience we're having now. Because due to industrialization, we're now producing much more carbon dioxide from industrial activities and other greenhouse gases. So the main greenhouse gases, according to the UNFCCC, are carbon dioxide, which is the number one, methane, nitrous oxide, hydrofluorocarbons, perfluorocarbons, and sulfur hexafluoride. But by far, carbon dioxide is the most important one based on just quantity generated alone. All right? So carbon dioxide most important, followed by methane. So if we look at these gases in terms of their sources, we can see that important sources of carbon dioxide would be transportation, fossil fuel combustion, coal and crude oil. For methane, natural gas systems, landfills. I did hear that a lot of methane result from landfills, right? Nitrous oxide, manufacturing, HFC, from semiconductor manufacturing, PCFs, and so on and so forth. So all these greenhouse gases have their important sources, right? And so if you look at the increase in motor vehicles on the Jamaican road, and clearly that is contributing a lot more carbon dioxide to the atmosphere. So again, we have natural greenhouse gases. So like water vapor is a greenhouse gas, but there's nothing we can do about water vapor. We can't do anything about water vapor. All these large, expansive oceans and seas. So there's nothing we can do about it. So most of that is being produced naturally, but certainly in industries, we can do something about the emissions or the man-made emissions of greenhouse gases. Again, you can look at greenhouse gas production by sector of the economy, right? Different sectors produce different levels. So you can have direct emissions and indirect emissions. So just a word or two about the major greenhouse gases. Certainly CO2 is the most important man-made, and we have seen tremendous increase in the production of carbon dioxide over the years. So right now, in 2011, atmospheric levels were like 390, let us say 391 parts per million. Pre-industrial level was like 280 parts per million. So that was a big jump. For methane, you can see it has reached a new high based on what it. Hello? Yeah. The way you want to man. Sure. Okay, all right. Sorry about that. Right, if we compare methane with carbon dioxide, right? Methane has a greater heat trapping capacity than carbon dioxide. All right, as a matter of fact, 1 unit of methane has the equivalent heat trapping ability of 23 units of carbon dioxide. But carbon dioxide is more important because there's much more carbon dioxide available than methane. All right? And I don't know what would have happened if we had more methane than carbon dioxide. I don't know if I would be here talking to you, right? So we have to understand that even though methane will trap more heat than carbon dioxide, the sheer difference in the amount of carbon dioxide to methane makes carbon dioxide the greater greenhouse gas. All right? So remember that. Nitrous oxide is important as well. And not only is nitrous oxide a greenhouse gas, but it also plays some role in stratospheric ozone layer destruction. All right, so some of these gases play multiple roles in causing problems. All right, let's talk about food waste. There was a report put out by the Food and Agriculture Organization in 2013, and it highlighted the fact that each year, roughly 1/3 of all food produced for human consumption in the world is lost or wasted. Right? And so when we grow food and we don't consume it, it has important environmental and economical cost. All right? So we need to understand the relationship between food waste and the production of greenhouse gases. So if you look at the food production cycle, you can see that, of course, you have agricultural production, post-harvest handling and storage. In many cases, there are processing, distribution, consumption, and end of life. In the lesser developed countries, most of the food would be lost or wasted in the field because they have less capacity to harvest their crops. But in the more developed countries, most of the food waste actually takes place at the consumer level, in the homes, right? People stock their refrigerator with food, they don't consume it, and it has to be thrown out, and it rots, and it produces greenhouse gases. What is very alarming, according to the FAO report, is that if all the greenhouse gases produced from all the food that is wasted, if food waste was a country, then food waste would be the third largest producer of greenhouse gases. You understand that? Right. So not only is the food wasted and people didn't get it to eat for one reason or another, that food waste then exacerbate the issue of climate change by producing greenhouse gases. So the largest producer of greenhouse gases is China, followed by the United States, followed by the fictitious food waste country. All right. And then different foods have their own carbon footprint. All right. So whether it be cereal, starchy food, meat, fish, vegetables, they have their own footprint in terms of how much carbon dioxide produced when they decompose. So it takes us to the greenhouse effect. If you're a farmer, you'll understand what the greenhouse effect is all about. But basically, for the greenhouse effect, it really describes the situation where the greenhouse gases trap the sun's heat and keep it close to Earth, right? And the gases that are trapped, they keep the Earth warm in the same way a greenhouse keeps plants warm. So the Earth's natural greenhouse effects keeps it about 33 degrees Celsius warmer than it would be otherwise. And this is what enables us to live comfortably on Earth. In other words, had it not been for greenhouse gases, the Earth would be too cold for us to survive. So in any discussion of greenhouse gases, we shouldn't give people the impression that greenhouse gases are bad gases. They are not bad gases. Inherently, they are not bad gases. Plants need carbon dioxide to survive, right? Good. It is just that we are emitting into the environment, into the atmosphere, much more greenhouse gases. And if you have too much of a good thing, you can have a problem as well. All right? So what happened is that because the greenhouse gases keep the temperature at a certain level, had it not been for them, then the Earth would be much colder than it is now, about 33 degrees Celsius colder. And so the average temperature on the planet would be a freezing minus 18 degrees Celsius, right? Rather than the 15 degrees Celsius it is now. So different parts of the world, you know, temperature varies, some areas cold, some hot, but on the average, global temperature is about 15 degrees Celsius, and it will be minus 18 had it not been for the greenhouse gases. So this is what really happens. We have the Earth, and we have solar radiation coming from the sun. Much of this radiation, when it hits the Earth, they are absorbed by the Earth's surface, and that helps to warm the Earth. Some of the radiation, when they hit the Earth, then they are reflected back into space. And there's a term they use for that, I think they call that albedo, L-B-E-D-O. And so one source is about 31% of the incoming solar radiation is reflected back into space. And then the incoming radiation heats up the greenhouse gases, absorb the radiation, and helps to keep the atmosphere warm. So because we are now pumping into the atmosphere much more greenhouse gases, then the earth is being heated up much more rapidly than we would want to happen. So the explanation is simple. The bigger question is how to deal with the problem. Because not every country has the ability to do what needs to be done. There are some countries with far greater resources and know how to deal with the problem. And that is why I said if the US is not at the table to deal with solutions, then there's going to be a big problem. So again, who is at risk of climate change? In a single word, everyone, everywhere, right? But there are some groups that are at greater risk. So people living in poverty, as well as women, children, and the elderly, they're very vulnerable, right? Outdoor workers and people with chronic medical conditions, right? Children are the most vulnerable due to long exposure to environmental risk. Those living in mega cities, small island developing states like Jamaica, and other coastal, mountainous, and polar region, and countries with weak health systems will be least able to prepare and respond. So everybody's going to be affected, not equally. This is just some statistics on what could happen. So if we get a temperature of 4 degrees Celsius rise, pollution and pollen season will increase. 7 million deaths from air pollution. Vector-borne disease like malaria and dengue will increase. 250,000 deaths from disease by 2030, mainly due to malaria, malnutrition, diarrhea, and heat stress. Warmer water and flooding will increase. Exposure to diseases in drinking and recreational water will also increase. So the projections are not looking good for us. All right, when we look at the global picture, it's really telling as to what could happen. So again, potential impacts of global climate change on human health. And modern climate change effects reflect rising temperature, rising sea level, increased precipitation, as well as more intense disasters. So we have storms and flooding may lead to morbidity, mortality, and displacement of human beings. Heat, morbidity, mortality, vectors, infectious diseases, malaria, dengue, and others. Air pollutants, a range of respiratory diseases. Food supply, if affected, could lead to malnutrition and civil conflict can lead to morbidity, mortality, and displacement as we are witnessing now, right? So this is a very important slide. Probably could spend the next day or two talking about this slide. But it summarizes well the likely impacts of climate change on human health. All right, so in the center, we have the 4 main effects: the rise in temperature, all right, the increase in carbon dioxide levels, the rise in sea levels, and the more extreme weather, right? So we could start anywhere. So if we start with air pollution, you're going to have more air pollution as a result of climate change. And so because of air pollution, there are going to be more people suffering with asthma and cardiovascular disease. Changes in vector ecology, malaria, dengue, encephalitis, hantavirus, Lyme disease, chikungunya, West Nile virus, all of these will proliferate. And then you could have these diseases being introduced into other areas. So in the United States, they have Lyme disease and West Nile. We haven't had West Nile in Jamaica as far as I know. All right, we have had malaria. Haiti has malaria. So the United States usually report only imported cases of malaria, no local case. So it could reach a stage where states like Florida could see transmission of malaria, local transmission of malaria, all right? Increasing allergens resulting in respiratory allergies and asthma. In terms of water quality impacts, we could see a resurgence of cholera. Let us not forget that cholera is in neighboring Haiti, and it was brought there by the United Nations peacekeeping force. They came to help, but we need to understand that when people travel to other countries, they take, among other things, sometimes the diseases that they have. Understand me? And that was how Haiti got cholera. I think it started in 2010, and it continues to this day. So cholera, we had an outbreak of cholera back in 1991. Started in Peru and spread in Central and South America. And I can recall distinctly then, our slogan here was, it's not a matter of if we're going to get cholera, it's a matter of when. And fortunately, that did not materialize. But just to remind you, last time we had cholera in Jamaica was in 1854. Yeah, the first outbreak in 1850 and a second outbreak in 1854. And you would have noticed that nice plaza they have built on the Cholera Cemetery in Kingston. And that's why I can't believe in a dopey, right? I can't believe in a dopey because if you're really dopey, then nobody can build on top of you, right? But other diseases, cryptosporidiosis, Campylobacter, leptospirosis, all of these could result if our water quality is impacted in a negative way. In terms of water and food supplies, malnutrition could result, as well as a rise in diarrheal diseases, if not foodborne diseases. In terms of environmental degradation, in some cases, conditions could get so bad that people are forced to migrate. Civil conflict, and the problem, the health problem, I think, which is given the least attention, is mental health impacts. Right? So there is a disaster, people are impacted. You may build a house, you may give them food and clothing, but you forget that they had mental health impacts, right? And that is not attended to, and that can be pretty long term. So right now, anytime a hurricane threatens Jamaica, it takes me right back to Gilbert, right? Because Gilbert was my first experience with a hurricane. and it was nice. Right? Imagine inside your house and you see a zinc lifting, you can see the sky from in your house. That's an unusual sight, right? You're not supposed to be inside and can see the sky, right? But Gilbert was an experience. The good thing about Gilbert was that it came during the day and not during the night. If it was during the night, then I don't know what would have happened, right? And then we have extreme heat. So we have heat-related illness and death. A lot of people dying because they have cardiovascular failure. And in terms of severe weather, many people can be injured, people can be killed, and of course, there are going to be mental health impacts because people are going to lose their house, their animals, and possibly loved ones. So climate change has and can have a very diverse impact on human health. Of course, it depends on where you live. It can also depend on your socioeconomic status. Some people, because they can afford better housing, they may be less impacted, whereas the poor who live near the gully bank, they may get flooded out and all of that. But the fact of the matter is that with climate change, everyone is going to be affected. Maybe not to the same extent, but the effects are going to be felt across the board. This is a slide on impact of climate change on human health in the United States. Of course, the usual climate impacts. They look at it in terms of impact on medical and physical health, impact on mental health, and impact on community health. We could categorize our situation here like this, and we could come up with examples like they have. But wherever you live, you may categorize the problems differently, but they're going to be basically one and the same. Again, with climate change, in terms of vulnerability, we can look at vulnerability factors, such as demographic factors, geographic factors, biological factors, socio-political conditions, socioeconomic factors, and exposure pathways. People are going to expose in many and varied ways, extreme weather events, heat stress, they're going to be exposed based on air quality. They're going to be exposed based on water quality, because water can become polluted. But quantity of water is also important, right? Food security and food safety, vector distribution and ecology, these are exposure pathways. And for the health system, in terms of their capacity and resilience, leadership and governance is going to be important. The health workforce, the health information systems, essential medical products and technology, service delivery, financing, and all of that, right? We have a situation in our health system where we often say we don't have money to do X, Y, and Z, but if there's an emergency, we find money. And if we had found the money and spent it, it probably could have prevented the emergency from happening. So those of us who work in health, especially at the policy level, or even at the service level, at the higher levels, we need to understand the need to be more proactive instead of being reactive, right? And by being proactive, we can avert certain adverse situations from occurring. So with all that vulnerability factors and exposure pathways and the ability of the health system to respond, there are a number of climate sensitive health risks. And you can have serious health outcomes, which we have discussed before: injury and mortality, heat-related illness, respiratory illness, waterborne and foodborne diseases, the zoonoses. The issue of One Health is now very topical. Have you all heard about One Health? The concept of One Health. There's a big One Health movement because there is this interrelationship between human health and animal health and environmental health. So we have to look at it in that way instead of just focusing on human health one side and animal health over there and environmental health. Because certainly there are going to be diseases that are diagnosed by the doctor that will have to report it to the veterinarian, right? So if you start to diagnose brucellosis, or by the way, brucellosis in man is called undulant fever. So if you start to diagnose
Do you repeat that
bovine
brucellosis in men does what?
brucellosis in man is called undulant fever.
Come on, can you mute your mic, please?
Hello? Did you hear that?
Go ahead, Doc.
Now I'm saying that brucellosis in man is called undulant fever, where the person has a fever that undulates up and down, up and down. In cattle, for example, brucellosis is called Bang's disease. So the point I'm making is that if we are going to have human cases of brucellosis, the veterinary community needs to be informed because brucellosis is a zoonotic disease. If we're going to be diagnosing bovine tuberculosis, the veterinary community will have to be advised to do the investigations because bovine tuberculosis is a zoonotic disease, right? So there's need for this partnership and understanding and recognition of the important role that animals play in human disease and also that humans play in animal disease, because we have zoonosis. The same way if the doctor diagnoses typhoid fever, the environmental health people would need to know because they'll investigate the water supply and the food. You understand? So One Health, if you also draw Venn diagrams in high school, in maths, and you draw your Venn diagrams. So if you draw 3 Venn diagrams, the intersection between the 3 Venn diagrams, that is One Health, right? So there's a ton of information online about One Health. But zoonotic disease is very important. We have leptospirosis. Right now we are fearing avian influenza might become the next pandemic. And if that were to happen, then it would change the whole landscape, because the case fatality rate from avian influenza is more than 50%. All right, remember I had COVID-19? Many people died, but the mortality rate was pretty low, right? Avian influenza will be a different ballgame. So we have malnutrition, foodborne disease, non-communicable diseases, What is happening? Mental and psychological health. And for the health systems and facilities outcome, we can have impacts on healthcare facilities because in the case of adverse weather conditions, health facilities can be destroyed. Understand? Health facilities can be destroyed, and so you could have certain effects on the health system. So everything needs to be looked at in relation to other things. So this climate change thing is touching every facet of society. No one shall escape. All right? So again, these are some key facts on climate change and health. So climate change affects the social and environmental determinants of health. What are the key social and environmental determinants of health? Clean air, safe drinking water, sufficient food, and secure shelter. All of these things are being affected by climate change. All right? Again, we are repeating this for emphasis that areas with weak health infrastructure, which are mostly present in developing countries, will be least able to cope without assistance to prepare and respond. And that there's a great need to reduce emissions of greenhouse gases through better transport, food and energy choices, and reduction in air pollution. What are climate-sensitive diseases? Well, this chart is illustrating climate-sensitive diseases from those with high sensitivity to those with low sensitivity. Of course, heat stress, because with elevated temperature, heat stress, you can just literally drop dead. All right? Effects of storms, air pollution, asthma, vector-borne diseases, waterborne diseases, foodborne diseases, even sexually transmitted diseases. The WHO provides another list. So water and foodborne disease is top on their list. Respiratory and allergic diseases from air pollution. Vector diseases, you can have re-emergence of vector-borne diseases. Undernutrition from food insecurity. Death and illness from heat waves. Mental health illness. Occupational health injuries. So climate-sensitive diseases are diseases that are more likely to occur given climate change taking place. This is just illustrating in terms of vectors, the fact that you look at transmission index of vectors with climate change and elevation in temperature, this will accelerate the transmission cycle. So you can see at B, the blue line is normal, and the red line is what will happen with climate change. All right? So what is expected is that the life cycle of some vectors may be shortened. Right now for mosquitoes, it takes roughly 7 to 10 days to move from eggs to adult mosquitoes. This could be reduced to maybe 6 to 8 days. You understand? The other thing is that you can have severe climate exceed upper thermal tolerance of pathogens, right? So climate change will affect the way pathogens behave, right? And if that were to happen, the implications could be severe. All right, with respect to climate sensitive diseases, there are many stakeholders, right? So it's not the domain of any one professional group. Certainly, government will have to play a leading role. People in veterinary science, people in public health, people in agriculture, people in the med service, universities, research institutions, and of course, vulnerable communities need to play a part. There is need for capacity building in terms of doing risk assessments, in terms of improving our capability in terms of laboratory diagnosis, information systems, greater need for simulation exercises to help to prepare the population. And in terms of capacity building, we probably need where we can to develop early warning systems. So there's need for disease control, community sentinel surveillance, vaccinations need to be brought up to speed, vector control needs to be emphasized. And when we're talking about vaccinations, we are living in an era where vaccinations are under attack, right? Literally under attack. And vaccinations have proven to be one of the most cost-effective ways to prevent diseases, all right? And then we need communication, right? So the media needs to be on board. One Health people need to be involved as well. So we need all the stakeholders to come together and to make and implement the best plans. We spoke about extreme heat already. That is going to be the experience of people in many countries. And extreme heat will produce direct health impacts as well as indirect health impacts. So clearly in terms of direct health impacts, heat stroke, death, hospitalization, all of that. And then you have the indirect health impacts, impacts on the health services and facilities, increased transmission of diseases, disruption of critical infrastructure, ecosystem impacts in terms of drought, fire, poor air quality. So extreme heat is already responsible for mortality, especially in Europe and elsewhere. And in terms of the main heat vulnerability factors, we have the physiological factors, so older and less abled people, people with certain medical conditions, pregnant women, infants and children. And in terms of the exposure factors, certainly outdoor and manual workers, people living in substandard housing conditions, or who lack access to cooling, people who are poor, displaced, are experiencing homelessness, as well as athletes and attendees of outdoor events. So when we think about heat, we shouldn't take it lightly. So in some cases, it's not a big problem for athletes, but in other cases, a lot of cooling has got to be done, all right? A study was done, which is regarded as the world's largest study of global climate-related mortality. And the study covered 2 decades, from 2000 to 2019, right? And these are some of the findings. So in terms of all the excess temperature-related deaths, 51% occurred in Africa, in Asia, 24% in Africa, 16% in Europe, 8% in America, and 0.5% in Oceania. All right? So this gives you an indication of how the effects may be distributed in terms of global climate-related mortality. So I would imagine that other studies are taking place. In terms of natural disasters and variable rainfall patterns, as we said before, we can expect more precipitation. The fact that more than half of the world's population live within 60 kilometers of the sea, it therefore means that rising sea levels could impact a lot of people, especially those who live on or near to the coast, right? And what it could also mean is that it could lead to massive displacement of persons further inland. And that would have its own set of problems. So rising sea levels could destroy homes, medical facilities, and other essential services. This chart is showing you the distribution of deaths from 11 hazard categories from 1970 to 2004. And you can see winter weather accounted for 18%, flooding 14%, heat almost 20%, lightning 11%, severe weather 19%, tornado almost 12%. So different regions of the world will experience different kinds of disasters, but all of these may be related to climate change. All right. I've said some of these things already. In terms of patterns of infection, certainly climatic conditions can affect waterborne diseases and diseases transmitted through insects and snails. Transmission season could be lengthened while the transmission cycle is reduced, and that will be a kind of double whammy, all right? So if you have the transmission season for a particular disease lengthened and the transmission cycle of the vector decrease, then the projection for greater morbidity and mortality would exist. Of course, I mentioned malaria already. It's greatly influenced by climate. It's transmitted by the Anopheles mosquitoes. And right now you have about 1 million malaria deaths per year. And over 90% of those deaths take place in Africa, mainly in children under 5 years old. All right? So we discussed that already, who's at risk. The WHO has responded in its own way through advocacy and partnerships. They have provided much of the science and evidence, and they have provided information, information with respect to health system strengthening. They are limited in terms of what they can do. If we look across the globe, the impacts on different regions from climate change are not expected to be identical. some regions are going to experience impacts that other regions may not experience. So for Latin America, it is the projection here is that there is significant risk of biodiversity loss as some species will become extinct. Productivity of certain crops is projected to decrease. Livestock is said to decline. Changes in precipitation. You know, in Latin America and South America, Latin America, we get a lot of rainfall compared to other parts of the world. North America will experience their own changes. This is where I want to focus on for a minute. Small island states like the Caribbean, of course, we face the risk of increasing tropical cyclones or storms, right? We expect large population reduction. Some species are going to become extinct. Severe coral bleaching is expected. Freshwater stress and drought risk for the Caribbean, those are projected. Settlements and infrastructure would be affected. Climate-related migration is expected to increase. Nowadays, a lot of people migrate because of economics. We might end up having climate-related migration and all of that. So the fact that these islands are small, any substantial increase in sea levels could cause serious flooding. Right, so just read through this. I want to get to climate change mitigation. So when we talk about climate change mitigation, we're referring to efforts to reduce or prevent emission of greenhouse gases. And we have on this slide listed a number of things that could be done by government to mitigate climate change. I wanted to read through them. A lot of stuff can be done. For the health sector, these are recommendations in terms of mitigation of climate change and also some suggested strategies for adaptation. Right? So with that adaptation, you're trying to lessen the health risk, but with mitigation, you're trying to reduce or prevent greenhouse gas production. So look at this slide for what it's worth. There are many things here that we can do in terms of the health system, both for mitigation and for adaptation. I want to end by just talking a little about the Paris Climate Agreement. Paris Climate Agreement started many years ago when countries came together to decide what could be done to slow the rate of climate change. And they wanted to limit the temperature increase to 1.5 degrees Celsius. What that means is that some serious efforts would have been made in cutting back on greenhouse gas production. So in a nutshell, the Paris Agreement had these basic goals. They wanted to save and increase forest areas to capture greenhouse gases. Remember that plants need carbon dioxide and water to make food through the process of photosynthesis. They also wanted to make finance consistent and align with agreement goals. They want to hold average increase in global temperature to 2 degrees Celsius, limit temperature increase to 1.5, and increase the ability of countries to adapt to climate change. So it was this international meeting, and after a while, different countries start to sign on to this agreement. So these were the key points. Initially, it was approved by 195 countries, and it took effect from 2020. And these are the plans and projections up until, I think, 2050, right? So in terms of temperature, they had a plan. In terms of financing, the fact that rich countries must provide $100 billion to start, and they would increase that amount by 2025. In terms of differentiation, developed countries must continue to take the lead. Developing nations are encouraged to enhance their efforts. It was realized that all countries can make the same efforts. In terms of emissions objectives, they are listed there. Burden sharing, developed countries must provide financial resources to help developing countries. They had a review mechanism in place, so after every 5 years, they would review what was going on, and so on and so forth. And it was going quite well until the United States withdrew in 2019, I think. Right, so this is 2019 when the United States withdrew. So United States in red, Alaska up here. And then 2021, you had the United States going back to the Paris Agreement. So as it is now, the United States is threatening to withdraw again, right? So I don't know what is going to happen, but there is need for this Paris Agreement to work. And it is important that all the countries do what they're supposed to do. And no matter how small the country is, they can make a contribution to the reduction in greenhouse gases. They can implement strategies for that to be done, right? So if every country, especially a major country, does not cooperate, then I think not much will be achieved. So you can read up on the Paris Agreement, and if you have any questions, we could take it next time. So I'm going to end here just to say that I have received today the class list. So I will put you in groups for the issue briefs, presentation, and discussion in class. And since I won't see you before next week, I will post it on the core site on daily for you to see, right? And I hope you're all working on your issue briefs. Remember, the emphasis is on brief. Right?
Just
So
a
there was no
question, Doc. I'm not sure if
Yeah.
it was asked before. We should choose any topic that we want to do for the issue brief, or you have a set amount of topics that we can choose from?
No. The former. You are to identify an environmental health problem that you know to be existing somewhere. All right? And then you are going to describe the problem. What it is, who are being affected, are people being killed or getting sick? Are there any legislation in relation to this problem? Who should be solving this problem? So you need to describe the problem so that we can know that the problem is existing and where the problem is existing, who are affected, and so on and so forth. If any attempt was made to deal with the problem, you can mention that, right? But it must be a problem that you are aware of that is existing somewhere. And I would suggest that you try to focus on a problem in an area rather than a national problem. It's hard to deal with a national problem. So for you to gain maximally from this thing, it's better for you to focus on, it could be a problem in an institution, it could be a problem in a community. So focus on a local situation where you'll be in a better position to describe very accurately what the problem is. Yeah? And then just to summarize.
Okay, Doc, thanks.
Once you have described the problem, you are then going to indicate in terms of potential next steps, what do you think should be done to solve the problem? And again, I don't want an essay, I just want you to list in bullet points what you think should be done. 1, 2, 3, 4. All right? And then you're going to pose some questions or discussion in relation to the problem as you have described it. The question that you pose should not require a yes or no answer. It should be a question that people can discuss, take sides and all of that. All right, so you're going to pose 3 or 4 of those questions. And then you have a list of references. So 3, 4 pages is enough. No, 7, 8, 9, 10 pages. All right. So bear that in mind. It's an issue brief. So you're aware of this problem, you're describing it, and then you're telling us what you think can be done to solve it. You pose some questions for discussion, and you put in your references, and you're good. So that's for the guidelines I gave you, and you should be okay. All right? So as soon as I finish with the groups, I will post it so you can know which group you're in. And then once I get the issue briefs now, I will indicate to you through an email, you know, which group I will send the issue briefs to the group that is to be presented at least a week before the presentation. Is that clear? All right, good. So that's it then for today. I will see you next week.